Hi, Vanora.
Yes, hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Hi, everyone. Uba.
Vanora, we're live, so we can start.
Okay, so we can start now.
Yes, please.
So can we go ahead to start now?
Yes, you can.
Good day, everyone. It's one to the webinar, and I would like to request the Afrobarometer team to present your board member who will be presenting the opening remarks.
Hello, Josephine. Hello, Josephine. Hello, Josephine.
Hi.
Josephine,
Yes.
Is there anybody doing an opening remarks?
Vanora, I think you should just go on to.
Okay. I thought I saw, okay, that's fine. So welcome everyone. My name is Valma Edwin. I'm from Sierra Leone. I'm the chairperson of the African Women's Leaders Network and a member of the integrated CESO platform on the SDGs, and I'll be your moderator for the session. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The SDGs are expected to drive national and global development agendas for the next decade and are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. 6 years down the line, how close is Africa to achieving the SDGs? The 17 SDGs are linked to 169 targets to be tracked by a proposed 230 individual indicators, and there are already a lot of important indicators and scorecards being used to track progress. Today, we are here to release Afrobarometer SDG scorecards for 5 West African countries: Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Cape Verde. These scorecards provide a unique perspective for the measurement of progress in Africa, the views of ordinary African citizens, who are in fact the intended beneficiaries of the SDGs. It therefore gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce the panel. We have Mr. Daniel Ama-Ato, Afrobarometer Project Manager for Anglophone West Africa and North Africa. Adediji Adeniran, Director of Education and Governance Research and Senior Fellow, Center for the Study of African Economies. Olubukonolo Williams, Executive Director, Education as a Vaccine. I believe that I got that right. I've been practicing to pronounce that for quite some time. And we have Omar Seidu, Social Statistician, Ghana Statistical Service. So we look forward to sharing your perspective. Just a quick house rules for our participants. The session is being recorded and streamed live on Facebook. Participants can choose the translation feature to hear the translated audio in either English or Portuguese. The social media hashtags for this conversation are hashtag Voices Africa and hashtag SDGs. Participants can use the Q&A feature to type in their question, and I will read some of them out during the Q&A session. So I'll firstly like to call on Daniel to kindly present the West Africa scorecards. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Valora, and good afternoon to everyone present. Let me first say we are grateful for making time to participate in this release, which is the Afrobarometer scorecard for 5 West African countries that we are trying to use to track the performance of these countries on the various SDGs. As we may be aware, in 2015, the UN member states adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. So the SDGs are mainly expected to drive the national development agenda in the various countries. And for that reason, it has become imperative that we track progress towards these goals. And as we do that, we allow whatever the findings that come from that tracking to inform policy decisions making, so that by the end of 2030, countries will be able to look back and say, yes, we've been able to meet these targets, or we still have a challenge in certain areas. We are also aware that many indicators and scorecards are being used to track these SDGs. And Afrobarometer, a Pan-African survey research network, is also making a unique contribution by providing a frequently overlooked perspective of these data sources, which is data from ordinary citizens. So the Afrobarometer SDG scorecards reflect citizens' experiences and evaluations of their own country's performance on several of the SDG priorities that can be compared to official UN tracking indicators. And then meeting the SDGs targets means making life better for people. Thus, our measurement will be incomplete if we do not include an assessment by the people whose lives these goals are supposed to impact. So when we look at the Afrobarometer data, we've been doing this survey for the past, more than 20 years now, since 1999. And we've been able to survey about 39 African states. And some of the questions that we normally track are able to help us to track 12 out of the 17 goals, SDGs goals. So as you can see on the screen, the slide, can we go back to slide 2? Yeah, sorry, thanks. As you can see, these are some of the areas where Afrobarometer data come in handy. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality of education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth. We have industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduce inequalities, climate action, and then peace, justice, and strong institutions. So Afrobarometer data can help track some of these issues. In fact, when you look at the Afrobarometer data, next slide, please, the Afrobarometer paper data, which is basically about democracy and governance, it can help us directly track SDG 16. Apart from that, we also have indicators on poverty, health, education, energy, supply, water and sanitation, infrastructure, gender, and inequality, among many other relevant topics that you can find in the Afrobarometer survey. Between 1999 and 2008, that is the first round and the 8th round of Afrobarometer survey, we've been able to cover, as I said, about 39 African countries. And we are in the early stages of planning for Afrobarometer round 9 surveys in the various countries. In fact, when you look at the Afrobarometer data, because we also gather a lot of social demographic data, you can also disaggregate some of these findings on the basis of gender, age, education, and economic status, among others. So can we move on to slide 7? So this slide basically speaks to some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, their target indicators, and Afrobarometer indicators that can be used to track them. So if you look at Goal 16, which aligns strongly with our signature topics, we have data that can help track the promotion of peaceful and inclusive society for sustainable development. And so when you look at the Afrobarometer indicator, we have indicator on tolerance for political violence, tolerance for violence against spouses, children, fear and experiences of violence in different social and political contexts. We also have tolerance for corporal punishment. And then when you come to the promotion of rule of law and national or international levels, we have experiences, citizens' experiences of crime, whether they report crime, the ease of getting assistance from police, and then corruption in police courts, paying bribes to police and courts, quality of services in courts disaggregated by gender and social economic status. So basically, if you look at some of these indicators, which are the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as I said, Afrobarometer also has some variables or questions that can help us to track these indicators. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Josephine. Thanks. So the next one on the Sustainable Development Goals, we see no poverty. And then over here, slide 8, please. Go back to slide 8, please. Slide 8, please. Yes. So when you look at the no poverty goal, what we have in Afrobarometer is an index, what we've been creating, which we call the Live Poverty Index. And it's made up of 5 different components. When you come to another aspect of it, the proportion of household living in household with access to water and basic services, we also have an indicator from Afrobarometer that can help us track. When you look at zero hunger, we have a direct question asking people the frequency of going without food in their household. So when you look at all of this, it tells a lot about Afrobarometer data and how we can match them onto some of the Sustainable Development Goals indicators. Next slide, please. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, so looking at the introductory part and then how we can match Afrobarometer to the Sustainable Development Goals, I would now like to walk you through a selection of country scorecards. And we are going to present these scorecards in 3 formats. Sorry, 2 formats. The first, we have the detailed indicators showing over time trends in each country. And then we have a summary page for each country using stoplights to describe what has been the situation in these countries. Let me also add that we have a lot of information. As I indicated earlier on, there are about 12 of the indicators that Afrobarometer data can track. But for the reason of time, for each country, we have just picked a few of the indicators to show the trend. But when we come to the other part, which is the spotlight, you have a fair idea of what the countries are going through in terms of a number of indicators. So the first country that we are looking at now is Nigeria. And you can see 4 different charts over here. The first one is on no poverty. The second one is on zero hunger. And then the third one is on good health and well-being. And then the fourth is on the quality of education. If you look at the first one, no hunger, we can clearly see that between 2008 and 2020, what we see over here is that there has been some kind of increase in the level of poverty in Nigeria. When you look at the zero hunger, the proportion that says they went without food many times or always in the past year, since 2008, has basically doubled. That is from 9% to about 21%. Then when you look at the health aspect, health and well-being, the proportion of Nigerians who went without needed medical care many times or always in the past year has also doubled from 11% to almost about 21%. And then when you look at the quality of education, which is being tracked by access to secondary and higher education, we see a situation where there's a decline from 2008 to 2020. It has declined for both men and women. And we can also see clearly that there appears to be a widening gap between men and women in terms of level of education. The next slide is showing us the gender equality when it comes to digital connection and then financial decision-making for a country like Sierra Leone. If you look at the first slide, in terms of access to mobile phones, we see that men are better placed than women in Sierra Leone to own mobile phones, even though in terms of both men and women, we see that the trend is that one of an increasing situation. So there has been an improvement between 2012 and 2020 for Sierra Leone for both men and women. However, as we move from 2012 towards 2020, we see a widening gender gap between access to mobile phones by way of gender breakdown. When it comes to usage of internet, over there, we see an increasing trend for both men and women, but there, what we can say is that there is no significant difference between men and women. Then when it comes to financial decision making, we also notice that in 2018, we had 38% of female making joint decision with men. Then we have 37% of male also making joint decisions with their spouses or relatives. But when you look at both sides, we see an improvement in 2020. However, the improvement in terms of the female one is much more than that of the male. Then when we come to Liberia, we notice that those who went without enough clean water from 2008 to 2020, there has been some gradual increment from 8% all the way to 20%, and it kept on increasing gradually. When you look at it in terms of access to water and toilet facilities within their premises, we also see some kind of changes taking place over there. So you realize that those who have toilet facilities in their houses has been increasing. And then those who also have water in their houses has also been increasing. However, we see that the increments are not the same across board. In terms of affordable and clean energy, we have about 74% in Liberia who are saying they have no connection to electricity grid to their homes. And this moved from 54% in 2015 to 74%. When it comes to decent work and economic growth, we see that the number of women who are unemployed are much more than even the total unemployment in terms of percentages. When you compare the total employment, it is much more than the total, and it also much more than that for the males. So when we move to the next slide, which is Cape, when we look at Cape, the economic inequality, that is the first chart. The number of people who experience moderate or high living poverty increased substantially from 2008 to 2004. And that is what we see in terms of the blue color, the blue colored bars. Then in terms of ethnicity or ethnic inequality, which is the top right one, the proportion that say the members of their ethnic group are never treated unfairly by government actually soared up between 2008 and then 2019. That is from 7% to about 50%. Then in terms of climate change, the awareness of climate change has remained stable from 71% to 74%. And also the negative impact, knowledge of the negative impact of climate change has also been fairly stable. But you look at these two figures and you can clearly see that they are very high. So awareness so high but stable over the two periods. And then the impact of the climate change also high in terms of the knowledge, but stable. So when we move to the next slide, which is on Ghana, what we see is that there has been a decrease in trust in the police, the courts, and MPs, that is members of parliament, between 2008 and 2019. However, when you look at it from 2014 to 2019, we see some kind of gradual improvement over there. So when you look at the trust in courts, in 2014, it was 42, and then it moved to 57 and back to 48. So between 42 and 48, there has been some kind of 6%. But when you go back as far as 2008 to 2019, then we can clearly see that there has been a decline. Similarly, in terms of peace, justice, and strong institutions, where we are using perceived corruption in key state institutions, that is the police, MPs, members of parliament, and then the judiciary. We see a situation where between 2008 and 2019, there has been an increase in that perception for the police. Similarly, there has been an increase in that also for MPs as well as the judiciary. But as I indicated in the previous one, when you look at it from 2014 to 2019, then you will see some gradual improvements over there. So now, these are just some brief trends for the various countries in terms of these indicators we are using to track the SDGs. However, as I indicated in the introductory part, we are going to present this in terms of trend and spotlights. The spotlights will help us know whether we are seeing retreat, or we are seeing progress or stagnation. And so what we are going to see now will be in the form of spotlight with different colors. So, and these spotlights, we have tried to narrow them down to 2014, 2015 to 2019, 2020. So we are looking at Afrobarometer round 6, round 7, and round 8 data to do that kind of analysis for most of the SDGs. However, when it comes to climate action, that is SDG 13, and then bribe for public services, SDG 16, because we never track these questions in round 6, we only have 2 data points. That is round 7, which is 2016 and 2018, and round 8, 2019 and 2021. So when you see a spotlight that is red colored, it simply means that the performance on that indicator for a particular country worsened by more than 3 percentage points. Why 3 percentage points? Afrobarometer data, if we are doing cross-country analysis, what we see is that all countries will have a data sample size of 1,200, given the 95% confidence level. The margin of error for each country, sampling error for each country, is plus or minus 3%. So where the change we are seeing, a positive change, and is greater than 3 percentage points, then invariably it is higher than the margin of error, and therefore it is significant. So when you see a red spotlight, then it simply means that performance on that indicator has worsened by more than 3 percentage points. When the spotlight is yellow, then it means there is some kind of stagnation, because whatever change we may have will be between -3 and +3 percentage points. So that change will not be statistically relevant. Then when you see a spotlight which is green, there has been an improvement on that indicator, and that improvement is more than 3 percentage points. Where you see a blue spotlight, that blue spotlight means that the country is on the verge of, or the country is meeting that target. Can I see the slides, please? Can you go back to the previous one, the previous slide? Can I see the previous slide? Yeah, thanks. So as I said, if you see a blue spotlight, then the country is meeting that particular target. Where you see spotlight with different colors but half, it simply means that we have a mixed results there, and that can happen as a result of having more than one indicator tracking that particular SDG. So can we now move to the country, the specific country? So this one is about Nigeria. You realize that we presented just some few trends on Nigeria, but when you look at this scorecard that we have, Nigeria in general had a situation where almost all the indicators, the situation has worsened over the past 5 years. So you see red spotlights for reduced leaf poverty, reduced frequency of ever going without food, and all those things. So Nigeria's situation worsened, but when it comes to reducing gender gap in unemployment, there was an improvement. Even though reducing general unemployment, the result is mixed, because there are 2 indicators over there. And then we are looking also at the gender differences. So you see that situation. When you come to decreasing the percentage of people who feel they are treated unfairly due to ethnicity, we see an improvement over there. So the picture that we find from Nigeria data is that generally it appears Nigeria has retreated on most of these indicators in the past 5 years. Then we move to Cape Verde. When we look at Cape Verde, it shows no progress over the past 5 years on many of the indicators, especially gender equality, access to reliable and affordable energy, and then the climate action. The country is also doing worse than it was 5 years ago when we look at poverty, hunger, and access to medical care. In addition, the country is sleeping in efforts to increase trust in state institutions like the police, the judiciary, and parliament, and has made no progress at all in reducing the payment of bribes and then the perceived corruption within state institutions. If we look at areas like water and sanitation, reducing unemployment, despite the fact that the gender gap in unemployment has widened, then we can say that Cabo Verde appears to be making some progress over there. The next slide, which is that for Liberia. Liberia, if we look at Liberia's scorecard, you can clearly see that we have so many half-colored circles or half spotlights, and then these half spotlights are even spread across. So the general picture we find from the Liberia scorecard is that the results on most of these indicators are mixed, particularly that for medical care, quality education, gender equality in technology use, and access to clean water and reliable and affordable energy. And the country is even doing worse when it comes to unemployment, gender gaps in unemployment, and then gender equality in financial control. Progress, however, has been made in reducing poverty. So we see the green doing better over there, and then increasing awareness of climate change, which is SDG 13, and we see the green over there. So as I said, Liberia picture is basically one of mixed results. Then we move to the next one, which is Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is experiencing worsening unemployment, poverty, and access to medical care and clean water, but the country is making progress on education and gender equality in financial control. There has also been missed progress for gender equality in technology use, access to affordable and clean energy, and infrastructure. Progress towards SDG 16, that is peace, justice, and strong institution in Sierra Leone, is also missed. While the country is doing partially better in reducing perceived corruption in state institutions like police, judiciary, and then the parliament, bribe paying for public service remains the same, and there has been no change with regard to awareness of climate change and its negative impact. The last slide, which is on Ghana, shows that Ghana is making progress on trust in state institutions as well as access to clean water and sanitation and affordable energy. But it is doing worse on access to medical care, reducing the gender gap in unemployment, and reducing bribe payment for public services. We also find that there has been no progress in reducing poverty and hunger. So we see the yellow spotlights. And then also awareness of climate change and understanding of the negative impact of climate change has also worsened. Progress towards gender equality is missed, while gender equality in financial control is improving. Trends in digital connection show partial decline. So broadly speaking, these are just the scorecards for these 5 countries. So in terms of conclusion, what we want to say is that the SDGs are intended to improve the lives of real people. We know there are numerous indicators and scorecards that are being used to track the progress. However, Afrobarometer SDGs scorecards are unique in the sense that they are highlighting the perspective of the ordinary people who are the actual beneficiaries of this sustainable development goals if countries are able to achieve them. And so what we are trying to do with Afrobarometer data is that if we consider these citizens' assessments and we compare or contrast them with other indicators, probably it will raise much more debate, discussion, which will help us in identifying challenges and gaps. And then together in our various countries, we will find a way of how we fill those gaps, how we address those challenges, so that by 2030, together we will be able to say we have been able to achieve something for our nation. And so, before I end, let me say that these scorecards can easily be accessed on the Afrobarometer SDG scorecards page, on the individual country pages, and then the Afrobarometer website. So when we end this session with our discussion and other things, anybody who is interested in getting much more information on these countries' SDG scorecards, when you go to the Afrobarometer website and you visit the country-specific scorecard pages, you may be able to find the information and you can download it for your own personal use. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you so much, Daniel. A lot to take in, a lot of information. I would like to remind the participants that you can use the Q&A feature to type in your questions. And when it comes to the Q&A session, I'll be able to read through, certainly not all of them, but some of them, throw it back to the panelists for further discussion. Thanks again, Daniel. I'll be inviting the 3 other panelists. They will have like 10 minutes each. I'll ask them a couple of questions and then they'll have 10 minutes each to respond, and then we'll go to the Q&A session where they'll have some more time to expand on their submission. So firstly, I'd like to welcome and introduce Dr. Adediji Adeniran, the Director of Education and Governance Research and Senior Fellow for the Center for the Study of African Economies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. The Afrobarometer country scorecards that were just presented show that government's effort in providing better medical care and reducing hunger is not yielding much results. I have 3 questions. You can note them and I don't mind going over them as you present your perspectives. So firstly, what do you think contributes to this worrying trend? And what can governments do to reverse this? The second question would be, you carry out research on African economies. The SDGs seek to ensure that all people enjoy an acceptable quality of life. The scorecards have shown a regression in some of these 5 countries that have just been presented. Does this corroborate your findings on African economies? And if so, how can this be improved? And lastly, a report from the African Development Bank indicates that high unemployment, 27%, poverty, 40%, and growing inequality remains a major challenge in Nigeria. This is clearly reflected in the scorecard for Nigeria. As a researcher, what do you think are the main factors contributing to these challenges and what should be done about them? So you have the floor. 10 minutes, please.
So thank you, Edwin, for moderating this session. And Daniel, thanks for the presentation, which was very good. And to the rest of Afrobarometer team that are doing this great work. I mean, I must emphasize that in our fight to achieve Agenda 2030, data is quite crucial because it's data that you use to track progress, it's data that you use to generate quality research and evidence, and it's also data that government needs to use in making good policies. So our Afrobarometer activities in this area is quite crucial, and it will support in a number of areas what African is doing in terms of progress. Now, looking at what you've presented, I mean, in terms of, so I will not answer the question chronologically, but I mean, I will just address it in my presentation in one way. So I would.
That's fine, that's fine.
So looking at the presentation from Daniel, I mean, what is explicit from the data is that, one, African is not making much progress on SDGs. And this is after 5 years of what we've done so far. So we are not making progress on SDGs. And after 5 years of activities, effort, finance, and everything. To illustrate with the Afrobarometer data for Nigeria, for instance, in 2015, as Daniel presented, Nigeria, in terms of poverty, poverty rate was around 38% in 2015. And that gives us a sense of benchmarks in terms of how Nigeria is starting, in terms of the starting point into COVID, into SDGs. In 2017, according to data, we've not improved at all. It's still 38%. But if you do a simple math, for a country like Nigeria at that rate, to really achieve zero poverty by 2030, we need to be making or reducing poverty rate by 2.5 percentage points per year. But in 2 years into the SDGs, we've not made any progress. But then comes the COVID-19 challenges. And the COVID-19 challenges has complicated things for a number of countries. So number one is the fact that in 2020, according to the data, we now have much more challenges. At least poverty rate has risen to 58% based on the presentation. And if you do the math again, that means we need to be reducing poverty rate by almost 4 percentage points now. If we are unable to do it with 2.5 percentage points, I mean, reducing that per annum, it's doubtful that we are going to do 4% per annum. And that actually, to me, signals a lot of challenges that countries in Africa are facing, that prior to COVID-19, there's a lot of challenges, but with COVID-19, things are more complicated. So why are we having these challenges? I mean, that relates to one of your questions. The key, one of the spaces where we have not made a lot of progress is the fiscal space. Prior to COVID-19, a number of countries actually has development financing challenges. And a lot of debts, a lot of inability to raise domestic financial resources, donor support were not there as it used to be, and private sector growth and development in a number of these countries are not impressive. Productive capacity rate, I mean, when you look at the new index from UNTAD on productive capacities in Africa, it's actually been declining in most of the African countries. So the challenges, I mean, to summarize, fiscal space is not there. Policy space is also very strange. I mean, I've been tracking SDG 16 over some of the, for the last 1 year. And sorry, I'm trying to hone my video. So if you can help me from the background, I will appreciate that. So if you look at the policy space in Africa, in terms of government, I think that's also very obvious from the presentation from Daniel. SDG 16 is kind of SDG that points to institutional level, government effectiveness, and kind of government rules in this achievement of SDGs. And again, if you see for most of the countries, it's either they are in red or it is mixed, or there is no change, which tends to tell us that policy space is also not there to support achievement of these goals. So, and the problem is that COVID-19 has complicated this. Donor support, because this is a global kind of crisis, donor support is not going to be there for country to mobilize in terms of strengthening their effort. Again, I mean, private sector is are mostly affected by this COVID-19 crisis. So again, mobilizing their support is also a challenge. And also government in its own, government has tried, and a lot of government has actually used their debt financing in order to mitigate some of the worst challenges of COVID-19. So going forward, we might see very slow growth, like we've seen in Nigeria over the years. So before COVID-19, Nigeria is recording around 2 to 3% growth rate. Going forward now, I mean, you don't expect them to do better than that. And for a country growing at a rate of 2.6% per annum, and for them for such a country to achieve its development goals, it needs to do more robust and inclusive growth is needed. So that in a way give a kind of pessimistic conclusion that maybe most African countries might not be able to achieve SDGs. But that's one angle to it. There is also some other perspective to it. I mean, that as African countries, if we look very well in terms of what can government do, and there's a lot we could still do in order to change the narratives. And one of the key things I've been interested in is in the political economy issue around crisis hypothesis. One of the literature on that side has argued convincingly that if you look at reforms, political, social, economic reforms that countries have implemented over the years, it's actually battered out of crisis. Crisis is an opportunity for reforms to take place. And this present crisis to COVID-19, it's also kind of opportunities that we need to analyze how we can change the narratives. Of course, it's a setback, but if we're able to harness those capacities, we can change the narrative in many ways. And just to highlight some 3 areas, 3 opportunities in terms of what the kind of opportunity we can tap to through COVID-19 for countries, for economy in Africa. And with this, we can change a lot of, we can record a lot of progress, and we can meet a lot of SDG goals. Number 1 is vaccine development. I mean, before COVID-19, it takes an average of 8 years to develop a vaccine. With COVID-19, we were able to do and develop a vaccine in less than 1 year. I mean, we know the history that Africa has been affected. I mean, productivity and health indicators have been affected by HIV, malaria in Africa. And we have been unable to develop vaccines to treat those kind of illnesses. But with the new technology emerging in terms of mRNA technology, that's actually shows some kind of tremendous progress in vaccine development. I mean, it has one of the highest effectiveness rate of vaccine ever developed. Those kind of opportunities, if we harness that, it means that if we can achieve that for COVID-19 in 1 year, we could achieve similar things for in treating malaria, in treating HIV and other diseases in Africa. And that, if we can make progress on that, that will change the narrative significantly, because progress on health sector can affect a lot of other SDGs in terms of job creation, poverty reduction, even school, because access to school is a major challenge in many of these African countries. The second area that we need to harness very well is social protection. Again, talking to policymakers in various countries, including Nigeria, over the last 6 months, one of the emerging narrative is the fact that social protection pre-COVID-19 is taken with levity. There's this robust lack of support by elite and people for social protection. And one reason is the issue of trust. People believe it's the process is susceptible to abuse. For example, in Nigeria, prior to COVID-19, if you look at social protection programs, our coverage is about 2%. If you look at in terms of data used in targeting, it only covers like 10 million households. Because of COVID-19 and effort around it, we have been able to increase the social registry for Nigeria that covers almost half of people that are poor. That's around 40 million people have been included in social register. and more better targeting is taking place. So developing social protection network and harnessing this kind of momentum around that can really, really support achievement of SDGs in Africa. And every government in Africa need to tap into those kind of opportunities that I imagine. The third opportunity I want to highlight is in digitalization. And when Daniel made the presentation for Sierra Leone, you could see that one of the area that you have seen consistent progress is digital inclusion. Even though there is inequality still needs to be closed, there is improvement across all areas. And over the course of COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, one of the exceptional sector that is less affected are the digital sector, ICTs. And that speaks to the fact that those are kind of crucial sector that we can leverage on for development in Africa. Given a very young population in many of these countries, tapping into digitalization or digital economy, it's quite crucial in that can be harnessed for progress. We could do this in many ways. High level of informality, it's high in many of our countries, and we will not achieve a lot of robust policy making with high informality. But digital progress can help us in changing that, because you can bring in a lot of firms and institutions into those platforms. And in a way, you can change a lot of kind of registration, moving, digital identity and those sort of things. It could help in a lot of systems.
Thank you, Dr. Adeniran. Can you just round up? Yes, just round up.
Okay, so my conclusion is SDG progress, has been constrained significantly, but there are actually a lot of opportunities that, if well harnessed, we can use it to make a lot of progress going forward for Africa and across regions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We've learned a lot, and I'm sure there'll be a couple of questions following your presentation. Thank you. I would like to invite Madam Ola Bokunola Buki-Williams, the Executive Director of Education as a Vaccine. You're welcome, Madam.
Thank you.
Yes, so your work with education as a vaccine and others show that you're committed to working with younger people and women to ensure they have access to quality education and an improved quality of life. So I have two questions around that. So firstly, the scorecards we saw highlight some of the persistent gender gaps in education, access to technology, financial control in the household, and employment. Do you think the SDGs are helping to focus attention on these disparities? And are you optimistic about change in the future? The second question is, are young people in Africa engaging in the push towards the SDGs? Are they aware? And what tools are there that they can use to join the fight? 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Valora. And thank you to Afrobarometer for this information and also for presenting this data as well. I echo the previous speaker in saying how important it is to have this data and, as we say, to have the evidence to be able to do advocacy for organizations like us. We try to do it at country level, and of course, we don't have the same resources. And so it's really important to see this kind of resources, especially when we get reports from country that often doesn't reflect what we're seeing. We have seen in terms of the reports. So for example, Nigeria has reported on the SDGs in 2017, and they also reported last year in 2020. And some of these issues were already highlighted, but this is, in a way, this is a clearer picture than what we actually see in the report. Because often when this data is being collected and scorecards are being done, we're seeing a lot of focus on policies. We're seeing a lot of focus on, the some level of implementation, but we're not actually seeing how it affects lived realities of people on the ground. So I think it's quite important to be able to see the answers to these questions from people who are living these lives and are trying to see how the SDGs actually have an impact on them. You know, there's been a big conversation around localization and what the SDG means at the local level, and for us, what it means for young people. We definitely see our work within the context of how is the work that we're doing, how is it pushing in terms of advocacy towards achieving the SDGs, and how, you know, is it actually, you know, pushing towards achieving Agenda 2063, which is also an Africa agenda. And then more importantly, how is it impacting the lives of young people? Like someone mentioned earlier, in a country like Nigeria, 60% of the population is under the age of 30. 42% is between the ages of 10 to 24. So these issues are really significant and quite important. So yes, you know, the long-winded answer that I've pretty much given is to show that yes, the SDGs are quite important. And quite significant for us. It really helps us to focus. It really helps us to be able to say our governments made a commitment to these SDGs. They were part of the conversations. They were part of the post-2015 consensus. A lot of us were also part of these conversations. And when countries are writing reports or countries are saying that, oh, we've achieved it, or for example, in Nigeria, where they've developed an economic recovery plan, or where they develop different economic plans, they do mention the SDGs. So it's obviously they're paying attention to it. And there's an Office for Special Assistance on SDGs. So this is something that's considered important, and it gives us a little bit of leverage as civil society to be able to say, this is what you're working towards. This is what you should be collecting data towards. Are you making any progress whatsoever? What is being done? So it gives us an accountability tool, to be quite honest, to be able to say, well, we are not seeing that progress. Or we're not seeing the progress on the impacts on the lives of women specifically in achieving SDG 5, or we're not seeing progress in SDG 3, we're not seeing progress in SDG 4. So that when the government is coming to us and saying something like, for example, that, oh, you know, we've lifted 10.5 million people out of poverty, but we're seeing you know, people saying no, but the cost of eating has gone up when people are spending 70% of their salaries on food, and we're seeing the cost double, we're seeing inflation increase. And now the scorecard is also showing that, yes, you know, whatever little progress you have made is going down. So it really does help us make a really stronger argument. Or for example, at a speech given recently in a university, there was a comment, the person representing the president saying that, oh, we don't have enough money to invest in education. They were talking about tertiary education, but they were saying that, you know, we don't have enough money to invest in education. And we're seeing it reflected in the scorecard. And as the previous speaker said, COVID-19 has had an impact on that as well. So for a lot of us who are doing this work, and for young people who are engaging in these conversations, it really does make sense for us to be able to say, you know, this is something that is really critical and it's really important. So you can't just make statements saying that you can't invest in education, because if you're not, then you're not fulfilling your promises. You're not fulfilling your commitment. And if you're saying that, oh, it's because we don't have enough funding, COVID is having an impact on that. But then the question now becomes, what are you prioritizing? Shouldn't you be prioritizing education? Shouldn't you be prioritizing health? Shouldn't you be prioritizing access to decent work, especially for your population? And if you're not prioritizing that, what are you prioritizing? Because there's no way for your economy to grow, because we're not only just talking about poverty in terms of being cash poor, right? We're talking about multidimensional poverty, which is increasing across different countries in Africa and especially in Nigeria. So that's really critical for us to be able to have this conversation. So for us, this is really great to have the scorecard, because we are going to use it in our advocacy. And we have been working with the young people who have been trying to do scorecard. Even last year, we attempted to do a shadow report as well, to be able to show, you know, in more in-depth what it means in terms of achieving the SDGs for young people, and what are the missing gaps and who's been left behind. So it's not just young people, but young people in rural communities, young people who are in communities where there's conflict, specifically also young people with disabilities, and how are we ensuring that they are included? How are we ensuring that they are being supported? And one of the things we tried to do was also a scorecard looking at the state level, because often we focus on the national picture. which, yes, very important, but the subnational level is also quite important and quite critical. And so for a lot of young people, that's where a lot of decisions are also made about their lives. So around, for example, in Nigeria, for around the issues of education and health, the state governments have a lot more control about it. The government can provide catalytic funding, the government can provide, national policies, but at the end of the day, it's the state governments who decide what kind of health policies they're going to adopt, what kind of education policies they're going to adopt, and how much money they're going to invest in education, in healthcare, in addressing the gender disparities, and in addressing the gender gaps. So it's quite critical for us to be able to see these kind of scorecards, but also to be able to replicate it at the state level. We've tried to do that, but I think this actually provides us another tool to be able to see how we can ensure that young people can also find answers to this, to do a comparison at the national level, because we know there's a difference among states in being able to achieve education, in being able to reduce gender disparities in particular, because one of the things we know from COVID-19 that it's showing itself very clearly is that a lot of girls are dropping out of school because of violence, because of unintended pregnancies, and because of financial difficulties as well, which we know existed previously, right? So for example, there was a research that the Malala Fund did in Kaduna State, where we worked to support girls to go back to school. And one of the things that came out, from the research that was really demoralizing to me and was an important way of doing advocacy even to communities, is that parents were putting their sons in private schools and their daughters in public schools. And so in terms of the issues you were seeing, like what kind of quality education are girls getting? So if we're not even investing enough in the public sector, so even if we say that we're increasing gender parity in primary education, well, boys are still getting better education compared to the girls. And if they're hidden fees, then parents are also saying that they wouldn't stand. Or when we see the issue of insecurity, which is also reflected, in the scorecard, where we're seeing kidnapping of students, where we're seeing a lack of safety, then parents are also now saying that why should we send our girls to school when they're going to be unsafe? So it's quite critical to look at this and to be able to use those. So scorecards, shadow reports, those are the tools young people are using. This scorecard is another tool that young people are using. So am I optimistic? Of course we have to be. For us at Education as a Vaccine and looking at feminist perspectives and ideologies, hope is a discipline, right? Because we believe the world changes. We believe that it is possible for citizens to get involved and to help shape not just policies, but to shape implementation and to challenge governments to be able to do the right thing in the lives of citizens. And we saw that with the EndSARS movement. We saw that more recently with young people going out on Saturday, June 12th, to protest. And so they were not just protesting the fact that, our government is not responding to us in terms of democracy, celebration of Democracy Day, but that people's lives are being affected by this decline that we're seeing, which the scorecard so perfectly reflected. So it's quite important for us to then take this message and say, it's not just about the stories of the increase in a bowl of gari, which is cassava flour, that has gone up from like 400 to 1,000 naira. But now we have data to show that, people, are not able to eat as many meals a day. And being able to show that can then show the government to not say that, oh, it's just that what the government has done. Forgetting is that we're reminding they actually have so much more to do, and that's what these tools are. So much.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. A lot of energy and a lot of information. Thank you so much. And I certainly do agree with you. Hope is all we have to be able to move on and to achieve what we want our countries to become. I'll now like to move to our next panelist, Mr. Umar Seidu. He is the head demographic statistics and coordinator of data for the SDGs in Ghana. So over to you, Mr. Umar. You have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the Afrobarometer team for putting this together. And thanks to my previous panelists. I think this is an important platform provided by Afrobarometer for countries to have kind of snapshot view on the progress towards the SDGs from different perspectives, especially coming from a non-government and 4 different perspectives. They are far-reaching in terms of what each country is expected to do under each area. For instance, health, education, water and sanitation is not just having food to eat, but it goes beyond that because poverty, as we know, is multidimensional. And it is important to understand it from that perspective. Whilst you try to make improvement in some aspects, you may not be doing well in others. So the first thing I would want to look at from is, what is the national strategy for each of these countries in tackling SDGs? Is it anchored around the national development framework, or is it being implemented as a separate program? To that extent, we may be seeing the kind of so to that extent, I want to say that yes, we may be seeing a picture that does not look like some of the countries. For instance, in the case of Nigeria, where the first 5 or 6 goals don't seem to be doing well. But then that might be quite a simple way of putting points, policymakers, areas where they may be performing or they may be underperforming. And so it is important, while the scorecard gives a snapshot, it is important to look beyond this in the context of the national strategy of implementing the various SDGs. Now, the second aspect is resource allocation, which I think one of our colleagues touched on. What are the resources being allocated to different SDGs? It is important to appreciate that in the context of ensuring that the lived realities of people are actually impacted. So to that extent, you would want to look at countries and see how much allocations have they made. And this is tied into the first point I raised about the national strategy of implementation, whether the SDGs are being implemented separately or they are being aligned with the national development framework. Which I believe that if it's aligned with the national development framework, then naturally the resources that are pumped into implementing the different strategies under the national development framework that are aligned with the SDGs obviously will get some funding and some kind of attention. Now, the next area I would want to touch on is public participation. We need to appreciate the fact that implementation and achieving the SDGs is not only the responsibility of government. Society play a role in particular some of the SDG targets. And so we need to know what is the public engagement process in country that help public participation and understanding. And that is why I like the idea of using the knowledge on climate change, for instance, to assess Goal 13. Goal 13 is quite a complex area, but then just wanting to know what proportion of the population know even about climate change is an important approach in kind of trying to implement the SDGs. So the participation of the public in this space is very crucial. And so, and the last point which I would want to bring in is data, not just data at the aggregate level, like we have in the scorecard, but data that point us to areas of underperformance. Because, for instance, in the case of Ghana, during the MDG era, we touted Ghana as one of the first countries in sub-Saharan Africa to have achieved MDG 1. But for some of us who play with data, we realize that no, as an aggregate, yes, Ghana was able to halve poverty from the levels in the 1990s by 2013. However, in country, there were areas that were doing worse, which means that policy needed to target such areas than other areas. And through disaggregation of data, you better appreciate areas where you would need to target intervention. Because if you want to look at areas where Nigeria may think that Nigeria may not be doing well, for instance, or Ghana is not doing well, for instance, you might look at it from that narrow perspective that, well, the country is not doing well generally. But then you realize that this is an average that may be masking areas where performance is good against areas where performance is bad. And we need to know why are some areas performing good and why are some areas performing bad. And to that extent, I would want to encourage that with Afrobarometer, for instance, which is looking at this from that angle, it would be good to have the data disaggregated to that extent. But of course, I also appreciate the fact that the sample size may not be big enough for regional or state level disaggregation. But it will be very useful to point government to areas specifically that governments are not doing well. And that is why I think it is important that this measurement from a non-government perspective is very important. Further, in the case of Ghana, for instance, quite a number of areas that from where I sit, I see that government is doing well in some areas and not doing well at all in other areas. For instance, just a couple of days back, I've had to provide data on completion rate of education at the senior high level. And we realized that from the 2019-2020 academic year, just before COVID, there was a jump in the completion rate for senior high schools, which is not the same in the previous 10 years. The previous 10 years, was the increases were just between 3-4 percentage points. But for that period, the jump was so much, up to 8%. Now, but then when you disaggregate the data further, then you realize that some areas did not see any improvement at all. And that becomes an important piece where attention needs to be put in those areas to ensure that the entire population benefits hugely. Now, going forward, what I would want to see is that Afrobarometer, for instance, is well known to be one of the key programs that are looking on governance. And I see that in the area of governance, the focus has been purely around corruption, but then it goes beyond that. And that is where I would want to see the next generation of Afrobarometer tackling that as well. Because if you take, for instance, health and education, in recent work that was done with UNDP Oslo Governance Center, 5 areas were identified as the key attributes in measuring health access and education access. And that is accessibility, affordability, the quality of the facilities, equality of treatment at these institutions, and the delivery of the service, whether the people at the healthcare facility are courteous and whether the teaching in the schools. So I would want us to move just beyond looking at, and that's purely under goal 16. And this is a governance issue. This is what Afrobarometer can add so much value in pointing government to the fact that certain areas, certain attributes of healthcare, for instance, education, these are the things that the people think you are not doing well. So that there's specific pointers to specific areas that government need to work on. Otherwise, we may end up duplicating some of the things that are happening from the other national data systems. And I think that is one good thing that I would want to encourage Afrobarometer to look at in the coming. Also point to one thing. Now, you may see that Ghana has developed what we call SDG budget.
Could you please just round up in just a minute, your last point, please?
Yes. So my last point is coming back to the resource allocation. I think that is an area where, to some extent, many governments are not doing well because we are still doing business as usual in allocating finances to the various areas as we previously were doing before SDGs. But given the fact that if we understand areas where we are underperforming, there is a need to have more resource allocation in some areas than others. That is a way to go. And that is an example that Ghana has in allocating as budgets to specific SDG goals and targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on how the government reports on the SDGs and how Afrobarometer data can be useful to complement other data, and sharing with us where you see other countries making progress or still having challenges. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I'll now like to ask Daniel to briefly just respond, to come back again and just briefly respond to this point. If government and international organizations already collect data on the economy, the health sector, unemployment, and all the others, why do we need this additional data, and how can ordinary people perceive all of this? Briefly, thank you.
Thanks, Vanora. And let me also say, I appreciate all the comments that are coming from the other panelists, particularly the last panelist. He is concerned with data disaggregation and all the rest. We appreciate that so much, and we do that a lot with Afrobarometer data. Now to the question, if government and other international organizations are gathering data on these SDGs, is there a need for us to also be doing the same? First, I think what I want to say is that when it comes to research, we all know there is what we call data triangulation in research. That simply means that when you are doing a research and you want to understand the issue into much more details than maybe you are seeing on the face level, you need to get data from different sources and then assess the data, analyze them, and then you may be able to come up to a conclusion that this particular data is speaking to A, B, or C. And I believe when it comes to policy making, that is policy formulation, policy implementation, and then monitoring and evaluation of how that policy is even performing, we still need that kind of arrangement. You don't need to depend on just one source for your data to be able to say, because of this data is speaking to this, this is how the policy direction should be. If you have data from different sources and you analyze them, you go into them critically, it gives you a fair sense of what that particular indicator is speaking to. So for me, Afrobarometer coming in and also doing this kind of analysis is nothing strange. And as we said in the introduction, it is basically data based on people's experiences. The main beneficiaries of these SDGs are the ones who are saying, this is how we are feeling regarding the performance of our countries on these goals. Let me give an example. For instance, if we want to track access, improve access to health, I personally want to believe that from the government sources, probably we may be looking at an increase in the number of people who are able to get to the hospitals and the clinics and the rest, report their ailments and get treatment and all those. So year on year, you may be capturing this kind of information and comparing. However, The question I ask myself is, what about those who do not even have the means to get to the hospital? You have totally cut them out. When you use that kind of administrative data, you have cut them out. But when you go into Afrobarometer and you go out there and you ask people, how often were you able to access maybe medical care? And that person tells you, I couldn't. Then it simply means that that person even probably did not even make the move to the clinic or the hospital. So in that context, you realize that it adds on to whatever the administrative data will also be telling you. And for me, these are some of the reasons why when you have data from opinion service, we should also try as much as possible to look at them when we are doing these policies and then implementing the policies and monitoring them and be sure that they are delivering. Because if at the end of the day, you look at it from one source and the citizens that are supposed to benefit from it are saying the policies you are implementing are not helping us. Like the last speaker said, you may have pumped in so much funding into a particular direction, but because you are not listening to the opinions of the citizens, you are moving in the wrong direction without knowing. You finish everything only for you to realize that what you have done has not benefited the citizens. So I think it is not a big deal and it is not duplication per se for me, but it's more like augmenting what is already in the system so that we will be able to have a holistic policy formulation and implementation. Thank you.
Certainly, Daniel, I do agree with you. And thank you so much. Just to comment a bit on the gender data for Sierra Leone, I think I do agree with the findings. And if the focus was on access to digital, mobile phone, internet, I think there are related issues around that. Finances is one, resources helps to promote or push forward access. And then in terms of how the use of finances, whether the women can make decisions on their own or they engage with their spouses. We live in a bit of a traditional society, and most women, whether they're married or they do have a partner, they are of the view that they need to have a discussion on how they can utilize the resources. The good thing, though, in recent times, we see the government making efforts, especially within the context of COVID. And one of our colleagues alluding to what was going on in the context of COVID, there have been some poverty alleviation projects or interventions, and there have been some specific moves made to support women with some loans and grants that would help them, especially those from vulnerable communities and those who are entrepreneurs. How they develop the list is another discussion, but at least we can see some efforts being made towards directly providing financial services to women, especially those who are involved in the informal sector, those in rural communities, and those classified by the government as being vulnerable. But as Daniel rightly presented, there has certainly been an increase in access for women and men, though men have more resources, and because some of them are involved in quite a number of formal engagements, they need to be exposed to these digital facilities, so they have more access. But again, even when you go to some of the rural communities, you meet quite a number of young women, even the women at the markets. I mean, I'm sitting in the capital city that's in the west of the country, and if I need access to vegetables coming from the north, you have market women, they have WhatsApp, they'll send you audio messages, you send them audio messages, and a good number of them have learned how to, maybe their children or some other relatives have created WhatsApp for them, and they can access their messages, the audio messages on WhatsApp, and they do their business through that. So there are other externalities. The infrastructure, network is an issue, access to power supply is an issue, and of course, resources. So certainly in all these, the government needs to do more because it's their role and their responsibility. So thank you to you all, the panelists, for your contribution. And now I think we'll go through some Q&A. There's some questions that I'll read through. Can you just note them down, and then I'll leave it open to all of you to make some comments. The first one says, what is the impact of conflict on the identified indices and performance of countries? The second one says, so the first one is, what's the impact of conflict on the identified indices and performance of countries? The second, we know from our country's data and trends that more and more people will live in cities and majority will end up in slums, but goal 11 seems conspicuously missing, and they're asking Afrobarometer why. And another question is, similarly, are subgroup analysis adequately powered? And with specific reference to gender breakdowns, for example. And lastly, someone is asking, is there any plan to improve the sample size of the Afrobarometer data? I think I have just a question for Omar from Ghana. Maybe, I'm sure you alluded to that, but I think you have more time to emphasize on that a bit in terms of what are areas that you can identify and what could be specific challenges in achieving the SDGs, looking at the countries that have been presented specifically. Thank you. So I would like to start from, well, let me do the reverse. I'll start from Umar and kindly request you have maybe like three to 4 minutes to respond. We are a bit behind schedule, and I would like us to quickly go through the responses. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I see that with the SDGs and with the work Afrobarometer has done, it is important for us to look at the social sectors in particular, where we need to get attention to improve the lives of people. To that extent, and we believe that once that is done, there will be some ripple effect in some other areas. We have more people who have attained higher levels of education. That naturally would kind of reflect in the other goals and around goal 8 of employment, gender equality, goal 5, and all that. So these are areas that we think that countries can do a lot of investments to ensure that we have increased attainment of the SDGs in other areas. Now, coming on conflict, actually conflict affects the attainment of virtually all the SDG goals, because if there's no peace in some areas, obviously it will derail whatever gains that have been made, and also make it difficult to invest in some of the areas. Social sector investment will be definitely low. Economic growth would definitely go down. And so to that extent, you realize that those areas may not be able to achieve the SDGs as fast as others may. That is why it is important to have data in like this. You identify areas of underperformance, and then you would to ingest more in those areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to go to Buki Williams. Hola, please.
Hi. Yes, hi, Valora. Yeah. Sorry, which question did you want me to answer? Oh, I can't hear you. Can anyone?
Oh, sorry. So I can go over the questions. You can respond to any of them. It says, the first says, what's the impact of conflict on the identified indices and performance of countries? The second says, we know from our country's data and
Oh, okay.
trends.
So from the Q&A, just pick which ones
It's
I would like. Okay. All right.
Q&A.
Okay. Okay. So I think I would just answer. I already answered one in the comments that was asked, but in terms of the subgroups and the disaggregated data, and even looking at SDG 16, I thought it was important, for example, looking in Nigeria, that was one of the areas. And I think the breakdown was actually quite important because it was looking at relationship in terms of ethnicity, right? Which is always an issue in which we say as an identifier of if conflict is going to break out in a country or not. And I think it was important to look at it because with the conversations that we're having in Nigeria, if you look at the internet or if you listen to the radio, you get a feeling that there is a lot more conflict happening in the ways we talk about each other in terms of ethnic groups. But to see what is being said by the barometer that actually we are doing well in that area actually gives me a little bit of hope, because we don't want to go into conflict. We can learn from the examples of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and what's going on in other parts of African countries as well, that we do not want to go into conflict. We already seen a high level of insecurity that we're still trying to deal with. So we're trying not to get into conflict. So I think the truth of the matter is that we know that communal violence is having an impact. We've seen it in communities where we work with, in which entire communities have had to uproot their lives and leave. And their children were not going to school. We're seeing that young people are being taken out of schools. We've seen kidnappings. So there's already impact that's been felt in terms of education, in terms of access to healthcare. So I think it's quite important for us to have that discussion and what it means. And I think this just really goes back to the interconnectedness and the interlinkages of the SDGs, that we can't just look at one SDG. And I think Marita is doing a good job in that space of being able to show us that all of these issues are connected. And if you're doing well in SDG 1 and you're not doing well in SDG 16, the truth is you're not doing well. Yes, we can look at you as a country and say, you're trying. But the truth of the matter is, like, you have to look at the linkages and the connectedness, because that's the only way we can ensure that people are living their best lives and we're seeing improved quality of lives, which is not an opinion or an option. It has to be our reality, especially in African countries. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Adeniran, any comments on the questions?
Okay, so relating to conflict, if you look at basic kind of performance across country on development indicators, 3 countries that always emerge at the bottom are Somalia, Chad, Niger, and those are war-torn countries. And that gives you like indication of what all you need to know about the linkages between conflict and development. So it also applies to this kind of a narrative around SDGs. I think someone dropped a question that relates to my comment around how do you track progress when the key performance indicators has been affected, like say by COVID-19 or some conflicts in some instances. And my response to that question is we need to track progress on SDGs using both absolute and relative measures, because that will enable us to just not look at one side and ignore the other side. So by the time you look at both relative absolute performance and changes and relative performance, that would enable you to actually incorporate some of these shocks, some of these changes. So we don't need to change the goalpost. We just need to actually be flexible in our metrics so that we can capture it. And the last point, Vanaro, you talked about why do we need what Afrobarometer is doing, given that there are alternative data sets. I just want to respond to that briefly to say that if you check a lot of indicators on Afrobarometer, it's not like found X-ray in most places. And Afrobarometer is more timely than most of these indicators you mentioned. Look at Mo Ibrahim. If you check the index, most of what they rely on is from Afrobarometer. So I think what they are doing, they are complementing, but their process is also unique in itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Daniel, I think Afrobarometer has about 2 messages.
Sure.
And I don't know if you'd like to comment on any of them briefly.
Sure. Since the others have touched on the conflict side, I will not go there, but I will speak to the last two, why we didn't focus on SDG 11, and then whether there is a plan to increase the AB sample size in the countries in the near future. In fact, when we look at the SDG 11, it's speaking more to sustainable cities and communities. And so what I want to say is that, in fact, when you look at Afrobarometer, there is somehow data on this, because when we are collecting the data, we try as much as possible to let the sample distribution reflect the rural and the urban situation in the various countries that we do the survey. I believe when we go into that indicator, it may also talk about maybe peace within our cities, having affordable housing. Afrobarometer has data that collects information on the nature and the type of housing that people live in and all those things. So if we want to do much more, we can even go into that area as well and focus on that. Then on the sample size, being somebody who has been working on Afrobarometer with this question coming up every now and then, I would have loved to get a sample size like my colleague Omar has been getting at the Ghana Statistical Service, so that when I finish my survey, these questions will not come up. But we have to also understand that when you are planning surveys, especially with sample surveys, you need to also think about your resources. This is a situation where we get donor funding for this kind of work, and our intention is to try as much as possible to cover a lot of African countries so that we will have this rich data. It becomes a bit very difficult trying to increase your sample size. When you do that, then basically if you don't get the needed resources, you may not be able to even cover the 39 that we are now working in. So as I sit here, I really would have loved to see Afrobarometer in the next round. We'll be doing a sample size of maybe about 10,000 in each country. But I have to be frank with you, the resources to do that will not be there if we make that attempt, and it will rather maybe derail the effort that we are doing in the other countries. So hopefully maybe when donor institutions and even within our own country, people see the value of this kind of work, and we have the private sector also coming in to support Afrobarometer with some funding. Who knows, we may be able to move the sample size a little bit higher, and then we may be able to capture more people in our various countries. But for now, looking at the resources available, I doubt if we can do that kind of quick jump in the sample size. Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing responses to some of the questions that emerged. And as we round up, I would just like to draw attention to some of the issues that you had presented during your presentation. The first thing, it's about data. And every session you go, there's always been this strong argument about the value of data, even though we have a big challenge with that here in Sierra Leone. And sometimes we keep on thinking, how do they plan when you request data and it's not available? But your submissions have re-emphasized the value of having timely, reliable, and relevant data to support development. There's also the point about COVID, especially in light of the sort of economies we have. We have very weak economies, but the point has been made that COVID has presented an opportunity. How well our governments will take that on board is something else, because on a daily basis on our own side, you realize that things are becoming more expensive. Business people are complaining because as a result of COVID, the space is not that open for the sort of activities and engagement that are required. And certainly we don't have resilient economies and high level of donor dependency, etc. So when we have these shocks, our economies really do suffer, but there's certainly some opportunities we need to tap on, and we all need to ensure that our governments do that. And the importance of linking up the SDGs to a national plan, or linking a national plan to the SDGs. I think it makes assessment much easier. Recently, I was involved in the doing the assessment for the VNR, and I think that's why this webinar, in fact, is quite timely. Sierra Leone has submitted on Friday, and I was among the CSOs who were doing the sort of data collection, involving other CSOs and some of the government agencies on progress. And it was easy to do an assessment of where we are in the development plan and where we are on SDGs. Because unfortunately, we really don't see much assessment being given by our government on how well or how badly or how challenging progress is being, or steps are being made with achieving the SDGs or with the goal set in a national development plan. And when you look at our national development plan, it shows the various clusters, how well linked they are to the SDG goals. And I think the last point I'd like to make is the importance of citizens' participation and engagement in ensuring that countries achieve the SDGs. Government has to create the enabling environment, but I think each and every one of us, I do agree with that view. And we look forward to how the private sector can support and what CSOs can do as well. I mean, I think Afrobarometer is contributing in its own way. What can we all do in our own space to ensure that our government meets its obligation? So I would like to thank all of you for your valuable contribution. Mr. Umar from the statistics, head of demographic, statistics and coordinator of data for SDGs in Ghana. Olabuku Williams, the executive director of education as a vaccine. And Dr. Your name has disappeared. I seem to have lost your name.
Okay.
Ade DJ. And he's quiet. He's quite silent. He didn't help. Thank you so much for providing us with your insights and for responding to some of the questions that was raised. And at this point, we have come to the end of the webinar. And I would just like to remind you that there will be upcoming regional webinars on the SDG scorecards. For the Francophone Africa, it will be on the 28th of June. For East Africa, on the 12th of July. And in Southern Africa, it will be held in August and the date will be communicated. Also a reminder that the scorecards could be accessed on the Afrobarometer SDG scorecard page and on individual country pages of the Afrobarometer website, which is www.afrobarometer.org. Thank you to the panelists again, and thank you to the participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.